Welcome to the Founders Foyer with me, Aishwarya. This foyer is full of conversations, the space where creators, founders, and builders can look for all the support and concepts to grow their ideas into products. Finding the right set of peers, building the dream team to work towards a vision, and setting the table for growth. All of these are very interrelated from the perspective of strengthening teams. However, there's a layer of science behind the best performing companies and the humans who are part of those teams. When the tools from biological sciences meet the business world, there's a ton of possibilities one could look out for. From understanding personality to communicating better and to even making the right decisions at the workplace. I've just got the right person with me here to help us all understand more about this kind of human centered intelligence. Say hello to Evan LaPointe, the founder of Core Sciences, a platform that helps teams accelerate to peak performance state. Evan has been an entrepreneur in the past as well, and he sold his company Satellite to Adobe, before that, merging his firm Marketing Alpha with Search Discovery. Hi, Evan. Thank you so much for being here on the Founders Foyer today.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Can't wait to get started. So, let's probably start with your story around being a former founder as well as running a company right now. You've had experiences spanning across products, sales, marketing, analytics, and so much more. So, how did your journey kickstart, and what's it like to work in a psychology centered space now?
Oh yeah, good question. I mean, the second half of the question, what feels inevitable after you hear the first half. So I I had always had an interest in. I started my career actually in finance, in doing research and financial analytics, and uh, I think I knew it was time to move on when I would routinely come into work and I'd worked over the weekend on some big formula or idea. And I would say,
Mhm.
okay, I came up with this over the weekend. And then my boss would be like, oh, that's really cute. Somebody came up with that about 100 years ago. But yeah, keep trying. And so, that world was so mature that any kind of creative impulse you might have is probably something that had been explored in the past, maybe a long time ago. Keynesian economics was pretty sophisticated, but I found my way through a friend over into digital marketing and digital experiences.
Mhm.
I would say like in the late '90s, and that was where I could work on a new idea over the weekend and bring it in, and it was new to the world, and that was really cool. So a small team and I actually pioneered what today is called attribution or multi-touch marketing
Yeah.
modeling. We actually invented that in the digital space and released a white paper back in the late '90s about that. And that was pretty cool. So it felt neat to be inventing. And my capacity for inventing was very capped by working in another company. So I was
Mm.
allowed to do some and not allowed to do others. And that kind of was where my entrepreneurial journey began. I started a company called Marketing Alpha. It was designed to help companies doing digital marketing to understand their data and use it well and not waste a bunch of time and money doing
Mm.
basic things when we did much more sophisticated things. And that blossomed into a bunch of other stuff. And then Satellite was probably the biggest project that I had done up till then. And I think, you just start to realize that, especially people in product, which you and I have some common connections in the product world. Um, as soon as you start to have a problem and that the solution cures a lot of pain and time and suffering and accuracy issues, then you have a business on your hands, in all likelihood. So I started that company. And then basically after 15 years of being in data and analytics, I realized that the humans, there's a perspective in the world of data and analytics and data science, business intelligence, all this, that we need better tools and better process and better education. But what we really need is better teaming dynamics, because when
Yeah.
you look at data for a living, uh,
Mm.
it becomes really quickly evident that the humans are the problem. The data makes people feel threatened and unsafe and unprepared, and all sorts of human reactions unfold when you're professionally working with data. And these humans are completely unprepared to deal with that. And then you take that over into product, you take it into marketing, you take it into sales, you take it into customer
Yeah.
success, you take it into really around the business, and everybody sucks at it because they're emotionally unprepared and relationally unprepared to deal with it. So I moved into starting core about 5 years ago now, maybe a little bit less. Um, and I actually have a background in behavioral science and psychology. I studied that in school and used that to kind of help build these companies and sell and market all the things you talked about doing. Um, and yeah, I think I realized I need to blow the dust off of those old books and that old knowledge and help the world grow its capacity to interact with humans and control themselves and self-regulate and connect with each other. Because that's, if the business can't work well on the human level, on the biological level, all the operational stuff suffers. And there's very little good information out in the world how to kind of optimize the biological side of business so you can optimize the operational side.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome. What a fantastic story, because you started with digital marketing, I guess, even before it had a certain form and shape to it. And as somebody who started my career with product marketing, I kind of totally understand where all of these touch points, like I worked on products that involved multi touch points and like trying to, attribute back to what the sources were when it comes to lead gen, converting leads, nurturing leads. So it's fantastic to know that I'm actually sitting with the person who was, working on that, like setting all the basics for that. So, and like, I guess from your story, what I really look up to is how each of the paths just flows into the other, right? So, when it comes to data, often we think that it's just in terms of numbers, but like how every human has a story, I guess, like data conveys a story at the end of the day. And if that data is just going to be only about product, I think then we not factor in the team dynamics inside, because the data is just going to be so separate for each of the domain. Like marketing brings a set of data, PM brings a set of data, and then there's engineering with data, but there's no common thread that connects across. So I love the fact that you are working on a very data unlikely field, which, when people think about biology, they always think that it's only to do with um, the body, parts of it, and also like with respect to psychology part of it. But I like the fact that you're trying to convey both together and like, say that there is data and data involves teammates. So yeah, great stuff on that.
Yeah. Um, I think, that what companies miss about data. I was watching this interview, I guess 2 days ago. One of these popular podcasters was interviewing a guy that used to be in the CIA.
Mm.
And early on, the guy from the CIA said that 98% of human beings are living in their own reality, and only about 2% of human beings are kind of have their eyes open to just what's actually happening in the world instead of what's just happening in their world. And therefore, if you're in that 2%, you're you're in this rare headspace of actually paying attention to what's going on in the world. And as a CIA person, he was kind of making the point that if you're in that 2%, you can
Mm.
actually use that perspective to, in the CIA, manipulate the 98% by, because there's in a micro mindset. And what you're talking about, the departmental use of data is exactly the same thing. That what's really happening is that every single piece of data has one thing in common, which is it's about the customer. And there are really in the company two customers of a company. There's the external customer, which is the customer we think of traditionally. And there's the internal customer, which is the team who is consuming everything the company's saying internally. So you effectively have four experiences that data is about. You have a market experience, which is all the data that summarizes your non-customer interactions. You have the buyer data, which is all the data that summarizes the people in the process of becoming a customer. And then you have all the customer data, which is the data about people who are a customer. And then the fourth is all the team data, which is getting more sophisticated with like meeting analytics and time management analytics and workflow analytics and all these types of data about kind of how they, who's connected to who and how often are they meeting and how much time they spend together and how much time do they spend in their inbox and how much, so the same report you have on your iPhone about what's going on with your use of your phone is, coming to life inside of companies too. And it's a very incomplete, sparse data set, but ultimately is about the customer called the employee. And when marketing, sales, product, customer success, CX, et cetera, think that they have different data, that's just stupid. That just shows that they are in the 98% of people who are living in their own tiny little micro bubble of the world and not being objective and saying, this data that I have about my search campaigns, my display campaigns, my LinkedIn campaigns, my Instagram campaigns, my email campaigns, et cetera, is all part of the 2%. If we can be that 2%, it's all part of a 2% perspective that my data covers this part of a bigger picture. And how can I enrich other people's big picture? And how can I help them, or how can they help me enrich my picture, so that we are talking about humans and customers, not talking about campaigns and ROIs and stuff like that. So it's ultimately, again, I think a psychological issue underneath the surface that people are predisposed to be in the 98% who are living in their own reality. And what we do at Core a lot with teams, with managers, et cetera, is kind of break up some of that calcification. Because in many ways, organizations and cultures reinforce this idea. They tell people to stay in their lanes. They talk about swim lanes. They talk about jobs and responsibilities and boundaries and handoff points and all these things. So in a way, you're actually making your team stupider all the time by saying, stop looking at anything else in your peripheral vision. Just look at the single focus point, the inch radius that your eyes focus on perfectly. And then businesses wonder why they're struggling with data and struggling with CX and struggling with everything. So it's actually not that hard to fix, but you have to get down a few layers deeper than the way companies are
Yeah.
trying right now.
I think from what I just heard from you, for me, that thought was more about understanding that there's a problem in the first place, right? Like looking at it more as an internal customer and external customer. The two persons would be the people who actually know that they are facing a problem, and then they would actually want to go address it or look for ways to do it. And the remaining 98 doesn't know that there's an actual problem at hand. And for them, everything just appears siloed. Everything just appears like, okay, let me just look at getting my department better, or like just trying to go ahead and say, okay, what do I do to, get better at company goals? But, you completely lose sight of the customer who's, the actual, center focus of what your work should be on. So yeah, I agree with you on that.
Yeah, I think the best planners in the world, meaning like, I'm going to make a plan and it's going to go really well and it's going to result in something really big. The best
Mhm.
planners in the world actually plan from a future state backwards into the present state instead of from the present state into the future state. And I think if people are listening to this that aren't founders and they're kind of in their career instead, um, that's something good to think about as somebody in your career, that if you figure out where this is headed, like what job would you really like in the future?
Mhm.
And then you plan backwards from that job into the present, you're probably going to do things differently and realize that there's kind of a series of steps and dependencies that you need to kind of master along that path. Whereas if you're planning from the present forwards, you're like, oh, I'm an email marketing manager. What's my next logical step? You kind of stay in that 98%, silo with those blinders on. Whereas if you think, oh, this may culminate in me being a CMO someday, you're going to realize, oh, it's all omni-channel, it's all cross-channel, it's all experiential, it's all this kind of stuff. So I might want to start today expanding my peripheral vision, even though I'm still going to be on this fairly narrow path for the next few years. At least I can enrich my experience on that narrow path by being way more aware of what's going on in the world around me. And then you become more likely to succeed in all those subsequent steps because you're not operating with blinders on. And then by the time
Mhm.
you get, 2 promotions down the road and now you own multiple channels, and all of a sudden that's the day you wake up to having to stitch stuff together instead of the person who's been doing it for 3 years, you're toast, right? So I
Yeah.
think people just have to, I have this chart that we share with a lot of teams that talks about different kind of levels of human performance. And it
Mhm.
really, for some people, helps to kind of crystallize how different performance can be if my brain is doing different things. If I'm more observant, if I'm more thoughtful and analytical, if I plan more intelligently, if my actions are higher quality and my learning is faster paced and more sensitive, then my
Mm.
output would just be massively better than if I'm doing those 5 things at a, if I'm just paying attention to what my job tells me I have to pay attention to. And
Right.
I'm only thinking about how to solve the problems I know I have today instead of the problems I might have tomorrow.
Mm.
Just if you're doing all those cognitive functions at a lower level, you will not produce the output that a human performing those cognitive, functions at a high level will. And there's too many people that are like, I want, I'm, I've got the same job code as this other person, so I want the same pay and the same promotions and the same opportunity. Well, if this
Mm.
person's cognitively advanced in that job code and you're cognitively kind of more functional, middle of the road,
Mm.
they are running circles around you. And we just have to be okay with that. If you don't want to be the one running circles, then don't expect the same outcomes as the
Yeah.
people that are. And I don't mean that to
Yeah.
be harsh. I just mean that to be a little bit of tough love really helps a lot right now
Mm.
when we've kind of made jobs you know, about the job itself, the shape of the job description, instead of making jobs about the humans who do them. And then you fall into the trap of thinking everybody's replaceable. And you say,
Mm.
you and I both know Shreyas. If Shreyas occupies a seat in your company and then he goes away and somebody else occupies that seat, there's almost a 100% probability that the new person performs at a significantly lower level because of the human, not the job. The job hasn't changed, but the human
Right.
in it. Shreyas is, as far as I've met, the best, if not one of the best professionals
Mm.
to fill a seat that I've ever encountered because his brain, his intuition, his energy works so well for the nature of the work. Those cognitive functions are all very high. He sees, thinks, plans, acts, and learns at an extremely high level.
Mm.
So no, he's not replaceable. He's not replaceable at all. Unless you talk to one of the other very, very rare people that I know who would probably do it differently, maybe just as well, but totally differently. So
Mm.
I think that's just where, we've got some growing up to do as professionals to kind of stop thinking that we're interchangeable and that people are similar and people are replaceable and all. That's all
Yeah.
completely wrong. And that's again, at core, because I kind of consider core more of like a filing cabinet for my obsession with human performance. So when I talk about it, it might sound like I'm kind of pitching the business, but I'm more kind of referencing this body of knowledge and intellectual property that I've just kept feeding my obsession into.
Mm.
And as we release that IP back into the world, we have to teach people there are different functional states, there are different levels of output in creativity, and here's why those different levels occur. And you need to stop believing that people are psychologically similar, and you need to stop believing
Yeah.
that people are replaceable. And you need there's so much stuff you cannot continue believing if you want to perform at a higher level.
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
it applies to data. The reason data drove me here, I think, is data is a particularly challenging topic for humans and teams. There are, strategy, creativity, experience design. These are all really tough topics. If you put a group of
Mm.
people in a room and say design an experience, that's a much harder thing for that room to do than a lot of other things they might try to do. If you kind of devise strategy and priorities, that's a high level of difficulty. But I think data,
Mm.
if it's not tied for highest, it is the hardest thing for teams of people to discuss. Much for the reason that you mentioned, which is a lot of the people coming into the room are coming representing silos. They're actually not representing a unified collective understanding. So just reconciling across the silos is already a
Mm.
really hard thing to do. And I joke all the time that you could throw a spreadsheet in conference room A and a honey badger in conference room B, and there will be more injuries in conference room A than in conference room B. Just data in really, really tests teams. So it's like you said, maybe a natural step if you have the capability, which I was fortunate to have, to move from that field into kind of the psychological, biological field and try to help
Yeah.
companies solve at the root.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think there's a lot of panels that one could take and just like sort of dicing down what you were just saying at different levels. Um, for a lot of people, they've been looking at, let's say, a job or like themselves being replaced from a certain role in a more transactional way, because it's always like you're told, okay, you take this job, you take this role. There's like a linear path for you. Just think about that. And then there's like a sort of growth that somebody's already carved out for you. So all most people, think about or focus on is I have joined at this level. So what is going to take me to the next level? Or my peer is doing at this level. So if I have to get to the next level, I have to probably just imitate whatever is happening around, or I just have to take a couple of actions and just try to see how to adapt it for myself and then just get going. So I guess a lot of transactional behavior at work and also trying to see oneself at work as more of a thing that's very replicable is probably what made people, think that, yeah, I could be replaced. And the right example that you got in with Shreyas. So, not everybody's Shreyas, or not everybody is at a level where they completely understand, completely cognizant of what you can bring to the table. And let's say, where their particular input or value would be most received. So, from what you were just talking about, I
Mhm.
think it sounds more like one has to be very aware, or one has to be more in the sense of understanding what the weaknesses are, what the strengths are, and that involves a level of just retrospecting, right? Spending a lot of time with oneself and trying to just use some of those tools that you were just mentioning about bridging the biological sciences with whatever the data or the numbers would tell each team member as. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a mistake to think that linearly and to think on the default timelines
Hmm.
when you're planning. So there, yes, I think a lot of people will follow kind of a step by step path. There are ways to skip steps and to accelerate steps dramatically. And
Hmm.
um, for example, if a lot of people will have to change companies to accomplish that, very few companies will accelerate a person or help them skip steps internally because they're just irrationally concerned with if you do it for one person, you might have to do it for more
Hmm.
people. And I think that's personally, I feel like that's pretty dumb to think. I think actually, if anything, it's such a inspiring story for other people to see,
For
and
sure.
some people will expect it, but if they expect anything, if people feel entitled to skip steps because somebody else did, that's very
Hmm.
different than if they feel inspired because, well, why should a person who's so good stay at this level for the prescribed amount of time and then this level and this level? Because ultimately it's actually easy for them to progress to those levels by
Yeah.
looking outside the company. So if they leave, you lose the talent, for all these kind of silly reasons. But ultimately, if you invest in yourself, um,
Hmm.
and you do interview externally, if you've invested in yourself sufficiently, you will be the standout candidate for every job you interview for, to the point where you'll start to realize I can actually interview 2 or 3 levels above where I am today and still be a standout. And I can skip all these steps. And that's really a smart thing to do, is to get there. Now, going back to like not everybody is Shreyas, you're exactly right. And when we think about how people learn, learning styles, thinking about it kind of neurologically, psychologically, I I kind of think of learning as the very top layer of learners, or what we call intuitives. These are people whose learning is unlocked by themselves, and they like when Shreyas, for example, and I'll continue to compliment him because he just did such a great job of generating content. But when he
Hmm.
talks about product sense, for example, you can clearly tell that a lot of that understanding, if not all of it, is driven by intuition. That he kind of has a thought, he pulls the thread, he figures it out, he keeps figuring out and figuring out and figuring out and figuring out. And because of that intuition, this clarity doesn't just, you know, pop into his head out of nowhere. It's a process of thinking, but intuition allows you to continue that thinking productively. So that's kind of the top. And that's why the people like him are so rare. And you'll meet other people like all sorts of founders in all sorts of different areas of the business world where they have incredible intuition in sales and marketing and product and customer
Hmm.
success and experiences, et cetera. Now, below that, you have what I call semi-intuitives. And if only 2 or 3 or 5% of people are intuitive, I would say a full 20% are semi-intuitive. And these are the people that when we have a conversation with them with our coaching or our work, or if Shreyas were to talk to them, or if you were to talk to them, and you just said a couple things that are like, oh my gosh, and it kind of causes this like whole world to unlock in their minds. They were
Mm.
looking for a key. You had the key. And as soon as they twist that key, it unlocks a flood of
Yeah.
intuition, because they were just on the verge of it, but they needed that external stimulus instead of the full intuitives who can do most, if not all of it, without any external help. They can do it internally. So when we think about, like, we do a lot of management training lower in the
Mm.
organization, kind of in the middle and in lower middle of the organization. And I think, well, the statistics on management are that 82% of managers are the wrong person for the job. And this is according to Gallup. And the same study concluded that less than 10% of managers are naturally good managers. And
Mm.
what our thesis is in management training is, I can't make 100% of people great at management, but I can take that 10% who are intuitive at it, and I can probably increase it to 30, 35, 40%. So I can quadruple the supply of good managers in the world, which
Mm.
is a huge deal. Now, I can't finish the job necessarily and get the worst managers in the world to become great, but I can take all those semi-intuitives and all those fast learners who kind of don't necessarily have the intuition, but still absorb information like a sponge. I can take
Mm.
all those people and make them awesome. And that's
Mm.
what the world needs, is it needs like that spillover effect, so that we don't rely
Yeah.
just on the purely intuitive people to do great
Mm.
work. We have this kind of second wave of people who are right on the brink of intuition, and they need a
Mm.
Shreyas, or they need a me, or they need a you, or they need a whoever to unlock that potential in them. And that's where,
Mm.
to your point about thinking about career, if you get that unlock, your trajectory goes from this to this, like instantaneously. And then you go into interviews and you say, I mean, I've coached a lot of people in product on how to interview for way better jobs than what they have. And
Mm.
I tell every one of them the same thing, which is, don't go in there and talk to them about why you're qualified to do the job. Go in there and tell them how you are uniquely qualified to do the job because of your psychological makeup. What is it about the way your brain loves to think that gives
Mm.
you a unfair advantage over every other human who attempts the same job? And if you are a compassionate person, meaning you care to help other people with their problems, you have a massive unfair advantage in making good products. Because if you care about the user of the product and them being
Exactly.
successful, you will make a better product than a person who doesn't care about the user. And it's no
Mm.
contest. And if you're more creative, and if you're more kind of intellectually curious and nuanced, you will make a product that applies to more segments, more use cases, more nuance, more,
Mm.
so on, than other people. And 100% of those people, they go in and say, this is why I'm uniquely qualified. The way my mind works just loves the types of problems that are inherent in product. They all get the job.
Mm.
They are like top of the consideration set, and many of them have skipped multiple levels. And they themselves didn't realize that their brain was so much better attuned to the craft than most brains out there. Probably
Yeah.
5-10% of brains, just like with managers, are just naturally disposed to make better products and come up with better ideas than the other
Mm.
95 or 90%. Yeah, that's just a fact. And the other 90%, we can probably get them another 20-30% out of that, just like we do with managers. But that's kind of that's why I think it's a mistake to kind of think iteratively in your career. If you invest in yourself to be a standout and to be able to explain why and how you're a standout, you're not on that path. You're on whatever path you want to be on,
Mm. Yeah. No, very
including
true.
becoming a founder. Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, from what the points that we've been discussing, the founders, it's like two steps of levels, right? One is, of course, to try and get the customer feel more valued, to understand that they are mattered. And I think on the note of hiring, it's also to convince and get the right people on board for their teams, because that's going to be their first customer to deal with. Like you said you need some accelerant for those semi intuitive folks and folks who just need that level of validation and that external stimulus. And often founders are these kind of folks put on the hedge, like trying to find out the right talent, trying to get people on board. So from what we just discussed, I think I have like a couple of more in-depth questions to go through, out of which the first one's definitely
Yeah.
going to be about hiring folks, right? Because we're talking about how do you make that person feel more valued, and how do you make them retrospect and understand better things that they would not have done themselves otherwise. So this sounds to me like a lot of mindset over skill set, and that's often what you also quote about, like always regards to the mindset. So, and this is something that actually goes well with what I often talk to my peers and product circles as well. That when it comes to talking to people, understanding what really works for them, don't go and ask them that, hey, what kind of tool you use, but try to understand what made them think about that in the first place. So, what are some ways to like consider as points for hiring well, and if done rightly, what do you think would be the results of good hiring etiquette?
Yeah. I mean, mindset. So yeah, if you think about mindset and skill set as these two things a human will bring, um, I think people underestimate how quickly a great mindset will develop a great skill set. I think they
Hmm.
also underestimate how much a great mindset compensates for less skill. Um, in many ways. And that's not to say, I mean, I think what's funny when I talk about this with some people is they make it totally black and white. And they're like, so you're talking to me, you want somebody with great mindset and no skills? I'm like, the convenient way to argue with somebody, to polarize the argument, to make it totally ridiculous instead of acknowledge that, there's more nuance and more subtlety to the trade-offs. So, I'm not going to, if I'm hiring a developer, it's I'm if you're a reasonable human being, you're not sitting there thinking like, oh, I wonder if I can find a super cooperative person who knows nothing at all about development, or a great developer who is terrible with human beings and a total pain in the butt to
Hmm.
work with. Yeah, let's definitely go find a bunch of those two choices. That's ridiculous. So what's more what's more appropriate, so my old world of analytics is a perfect example, and developers are a perfect example, product people are a perfect example, but analytics is like the perfect example because the world of analytics has advanced from, let's look at some really basic data about user behavior, even back in the server log days, of just, this user ID went to these pages and did these things at this, it's on this timeline. And now we're up here with data science, machine learning, predictive algorithms, and all this kind of stuff. And if I were to go to the average e-commerce website, easy example today, I would, I would, if I ran the analytics team, I would take 80% of my team that knew nothing about statistics, ML,
Hmm.
data science, um, and who could just look at very basic data. And again, remember that the data is about customers and real human beings having real experiences. And if the person is intuitive enough to realize that this is data about humans, just like them, trying to accomplish a task on a website, then they'd be like, gosh, it looks like these humans are having a really hard time. And it looks like these people really like this and this together. And it looks like, so the right mindset is just like, you don't need to have almost any skill in these tools and in these statistical algorithms and all the kind of modeling and all the stuff that's going on at advanced levels. A team of just sensible, analytical,
Hmm.
customer centric, compassionate analysts will create 5 times as much business value as all these Uber dorks running all their R applications and Python scripts on all the data, because they get what they're doing. So the mindset now, and I'm just using a little hyperbole to illustrate my point, but I would almost guarantee you that a group of analysts in the right mindset, thinking in a customer centric way, finding frustration points and likes and dislikes and just
Hmm.
human, seeing this through the human lens, will massively outperform a team looking at all this through the lens of algorithms. Now, fortunately for the people looking at it through the lens of ML or data science, the algorithms and outlier analytics and all the kind of, all the formulas are going to spit out these insights that the mindset people would have. but they're still probably going to misinterpret them. They're still going to say, oh, well, our cart analytics shows that this and this happened at the same time or within a week of each other. And then they're going to make the complete wrong assumption and tell the product team or the marketing team to improve the site in this way, and it will backfire because they just don't get it. So the same applies to people writing code. Obviously, sophisticated skill sets in development are hugely beneficial, but without the right mindset, people will not write maintainable code. They will not write resilient code. They will not write scalable code. They will write conveniently. And I was sitting in a room full of developers one time, this was about 2 years ago, and I asked them, what's your definition of quality? And what the guy that was the lead of the team said, if it works, it's quality. And I said, okay, let's start. Like, keep going. What is your definition of quality? Like, build on that. He goes, that's it. If the code works and meets requirements, then it's quality code. And I said, okay, just to put a ridiculous example out there, if I wrote a megabyte of code that had a memory leak in it that added 1 + 1 and gave you 2, or if I wrote one line that had no leak and it was encapsulated that did 1 + 1 = 2, are those the same quality? And he said, yes. And I just pushed back and I said, you have a huge business, because the person's mindset obviously was being argumentative and difficult. But like, if a person is capable of being difficult enough to say that a megabyte of code that produces 1 + 1 = 2 with a memory leak is equal to a one line of code that does the same thing and it works properly, that's a mindset problem. I don't care what the person's skill set is. So that I think is key. But yeah, when you're hiring, step one, realize that human beings are immensely psychologically dissimilar. That what some people find absolutely delightful and will obsess about is what another person will absolutely hate to do and will feel like they're being boiled alive. And if you don't have that figured out yet, you're not ready to hire anybody, because you don't realize that the job is going to have certain things that it needs to do. And if you hire a human that loves those things, you're going to get a different result than if you hire a human that really gets uncomfortable with things like uncertainty or talking to customers or whatever the scenario is. So realize hyper dissimilarity in human beings. You hear that phrase all the time. We're more alike than we are different. Completely incorrect statement. Yes, absolutely incorrect. And if you believe that, you will make unbelievable mistakes all through your life with who you date, with who your friends are, with how, like, you'll just kind of keep thinking, well, we're more alike than we are different. So that person will probably start behaving super differently at some point because I want them to behave this way. Wrong. So believe that. Second step, understand the psychological tax of the role. So if you're in analytics, if you're in development, if you're in the mode of, like you're going to hire a developer and they need to do a bunch of refactoring of old stuff, it's a very different job than if you're going to hire a developer to do some architectural work in Trix development. If you're going to hire an analyst to clean up a mess and kind of reinvigorate an organization that isn't sold on analytics, very different job than to hire an expert on an organization that's obsessed with analytics. So what is the psychological profile? And then find the match and then verify that first. So you must say yes to the match on the psychological level first, then look at their skill set. And out of all the psychological yeses, some of the skills will also be yeses. So you'll get your double yes and you'll have a good hire. If you flip it and you match the skill set first, you'll kind of fall in love with the most skilled person and then try to verify the psychological yeses next. But you're going to be like, they're not a great fit, but they're so skilled and they've done all these great things and they worked at Nike and they worked at Apple and they blah, 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 and get all in love with the skill set. But why don't they work at Nike and Apple anymore? Because everybody hates working with them. So, so you have to fall in love with a person in the right order. You have to fall in love with who they are and how they think first before you fall in love with what they know. Because if you fall in love with what they know, your brain will trick you into believing there's somebody that they're not. And that's a big problem.
And you automatically fall into the bias, just as you mentioned, being automatically start liking them for very different reasons. And I guess this is what happens with most of the, interviewing rooms where almost the first question that we end up asking is, okay, talk about yourself, introduce yourself. But instead of observing some of these cues, what we go on is, okay, just follow there. So you did A, B, C at this company. So talk to me about what were your best moments. Talk to me about what did you achieve and blah, blah, blah. Just like, I think most of what follows on is just going to be either like a long monologue or it's going to be more of a dialogue, but just very, very, very
Yeah.
focused on action items that somebody's implemented. And I guess only the very, going back to the select 2% of people who understand that there's a lot of psychology involved here are the ones who would understand the underlying thoughts to why somebody is saying that they perform well at certain tasks, whereas the others would go about, oh, wow, you did like an 18% increase and you saved so much for the company. So that's a great thing. I think that's exactly what we want to do here. So yeah, you're like selecting. So and
Yeah.
for me, it brought up a couple of examples that just as you mentioned in terms of um, when you hire, especially for like leadership roles, it's often times like, okay, this person is served on the boards or this person is served on the C-suite roles of this company. So since they've done very, very similar processes in this company, that's exactly what we want them to do here as well. But I think since skill set takes over mindset there, people would join these new companies, but then they realize that what's worked for them there would not really work for them here, even though it's like probably very, very similar things that they plan to achieve. And that's because the mindset or the psychological connect is not going to be here for them, just as they moved with only their skill set in mind. So yeah, that's like the
Yeah.
flipping is
Yeah. I mean,
extremely.
there are certain mindsets, the mindset you're talking about, psychologically, the trait is called conscientiousness. And for
Mhm.
anybody, watching this who doesn't believe in personality, get over it. It's real. Nobody cares what your opinion is on whether psychology and personality is real because the debate's over. And all you're going to be at that point is a late adopter. Um, this same CIA interview that I was watching was interesting because they use Myers-Briggs, which is fairly out of date.
Mhm.
Um, but there's much more modern tools. The Big Five is kind of the one. If you were to go to a research organization or university, if you go to Stanford and ask the psychology department what they use, it'd be the Big Five.
Mhm.
And but anyhow, they use Myers-Briggs in the CIA, and every single dossier for every single contact they have has a Myers-Briggs profile in it. And in this interview, the CIA operative said, "People are laughably predictable." This is coming from a CIA operative who is in the business of making contact with people and leveraging those contacts to gain information and influence and all these types of things. So a CIA operative is all in on personality, and they are playing the highest stakes human game on earth. And
Mhm.
then we have Manager Joe or HR, CHRO Tammy, is a real person that I've spoken with, who's like, oh, personality profiles aren't predictive of anything. I'm sorry,
Mhm.
Tammy. You are completely, completely, completely incorrect. And the reason you have so many people who are misfit to their roles right now is because your belief is so wrong. So
Mhm.
going back to what you're saying, conscientiousness in the Big Five is the trait that kind of measures our desire to be busy, productive, organized, etc. Some human beings, again, laughably predictable, some human beings need to have tons of organization, structure, clarity, and busyness in their life, and others don't. That's extremely, extremely consistent. The people who need all this structure during, workday Wednesday also have a schedule for Christmas morning, right? It is everywhere in their life, right? So understanding that that's a real thing, uh, conscientiousness is also a measure of how much people like to use their memory and their knowledge
Mhm.
to solve problems. So they're going to be the ones that say, this is how we did it in the past. I know the solution to the problem. I've seen this happen before. They're going to be verbalizing that my
Mhm.
memory of something from the past is useful in the present. And the bias there is that the memory itself is still the right answer in the present. And what you'll see is people high in a trait called openness, which is the desire for deeper understanding, curiosity, philosophical and abstract thought, creativity, etc. They assume the exact opposite. They assume my memory may not be relevant in the present. I may need to create a novel new solution right here and
Mhm.
now. So if you hire the person who consistently wants to do it the way they've seen it in the past, or if you hire the person who consistently wants to treat every situation as a new, novel problem with a potentially creative solution, you will get hypermassively different results. So to the point of what you just said about hiring a person who did it this way in company X and comes into company Y,
Mm,
well, if that person's open, that will not become a problem for them. They will do
correct.
it the way company Y needs. If you hire a person who's
Mm,
highly conscientious, they will attempt to do it the way they did it in the last company. So
mm.
and you can have somebody who's high in both, which is really
Yeah,
interesting. So
yeah,
lots
yeah.
of,
True, true.
I just want to illustrate how tangible this really is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like the combination of that is probably the optimum that anybody in the company would want. Like as much as possible, try to be very adaptive, try to understand what are the new experiences you could lead yourself to. At the same time, use some of your past memories, some of your past judgments into implementing things. And since you brought up this concept of learning styles, and from what we're just discussing in stories, I see that each person would then have a very, very different style of learning things, not just with respect to the personalities, but even the part that helps them grasp newer things, like try to assimilate different pieces
Yep.
and come to a certain understanding. So, could you talk to us a little more about these kind of learning traits and these kind of personality traits that come up because of these learning traits?
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked a little earlier about learning styles of intuitive and semi-intuitive.
Hmm.
Um, and there's really four levels. You have intuition level, you have learners, and you have non-learners. Uh, the intuitives and the semi-intuitives are, they always feel on the brink of something. And it's that psychological trait of openness that they're just so insatiably curious that as soon as they figure something out, they know that they want to figure the next thing out. They want to just keep getting better. So they're always in search of new knowledge and sharper perception.
Hmm.
Learners are people that are not necessarily in search of it, but if you get them in a classroom or in a training or in a conference, they are people who do pay attention. And they're like,
Hmm.
okay, I'm here. So there's some impetus for learning. We've officially begun the conference. We're going to teach you these three things, and they're going to kind of pay attention. Even within there, you can stratify it kind of like you do within the intuitives, because some learners are really like eager learners and they quickly trust the teacher or the experienced person. They quickly map the lessons to value in their life. So they're like, oh, if I did it that way, I can see how it would lead to a better outcome. Then
Hmm.
you kind of have more neutral people who are kind of a little more like, ah, okay, a little more, they're not disengaged. And then you have what I would call resistant learners, who are the people
Hmm.
who are like, prove it to me. Where's the data? Where's the evidence? Where's the this? Show me an example. Give me a case study, or those types of things. And they're putting up a defense. They're kind of assuming
Hmm.
that the lesson isn't to be learned unless there's evidence that they approve of, right? Because you could have five different people and say, here's the evidence that supports this, and three of them jump on board and two of them are still left over. So it's like very personal what a resistant learner learns.
Yeah.
I find them to be the most frustrating people because, when you're in a field like I am, where you might be a decade further than this person, like I would rather make time for all the other learning styles. And I think that's what resistant learners don't realize is they're like, oh, and they congratulate you when you teach them something, which is always funny. They're like, yeah, see, you got me on that one. You taught me something. Not a lot of people get through my defenses. And they're like congratulating you for kind of getting over the hump, getting over the wall that they've built around their learning. And I just look at them like you're still getting the hierarchy of learner wrong, right? Like you're putting
Yeah.
yourself above your teacher, which is really absurd, and people who live that way, they learn the slowest. And then you do have
Mm.
non-learners, and these non-learners are people that either emotionally or rationally have a strongly negative reaction to the learning. So if you're
Mhm.
saying, let's get a bunch of customer support representatives from a call center into a room and say, let's go through a bunch of the scripts and the call analytics from the last few months. Let's look at the stuff that went really well and the stuff that went really poorly. there's going to be some people in that room that when we talk about the stuff that went really poorly or really well, they're like, well, I didn't do any of that stuff, or I did that stuff, the stuff that you're saying. So you're calling me an idiot and you're calling me incompetent. They get super defensive and
Dramatic.
they refuse learning because of this massive emotional reaction, as opposed to kind of staying a little more calm, deciding whether they're going to be a learner and stuff like that. No amount of evidence is going to get them over this emotional or irrational reaction in that moment, at least. And again, I think when you're a teacher, like I am, or like Shreyas is, to bring him back up, I think what the learners that are resistant and non-learners don't understand is you're a waste of my time. Like, I could trade the 5 minutes I'm going to spend with you convincing you to believe this with any of these other people and make all this headway. So there's opportunity cost to being resistant in learning. But yeah, you have intuitives, you have learners, you have non-learners. Within each of those categories, you kind of have some even higher precision things. And if you're a resistant learner, it can really be helpful to identify this kind of like pride that you have in resisting people teaching you, and start to, at minimum, zero in on people of high credibility. Not because they're famous. Like, don't zero in on Patrick Lencioni because he wrote a best-selling business book. Zero in on Shreyas because he's actually done the work. He is extremely successful. And one of the funny things is a lot of people talk to me about him, like how unrealistic he is. And I was like, it's only unrealistic if he couldn't do it. He's not the academic saying, do this. The question you need to ask yourself is, if he jumped into your job, would he fix the problem that you can't fix within a week or a month? I think the answer is yes. So that is realistic. You're just not comfortable with the advice, which is very credible. So there's people that throw even his advice, my advice, people who have been there, who have been successful, who could do it if they were the ones doing it. They reject that advice like it's unrealistic. No, it's extremely realistic, but maybe uncomfortable. And that slow pace of learning is just damaging the learner. So, and that really hurts you. It compounds, right? As you learn more faster, that's compounding. As you resist learning, that's compounding. That's not good.
Yeah. This is what often happens with feedback as well, right? That when you sort of project the truth as feedback, whether it's like hard-hitting feedback or whether it's like very specific to something that's not working, then there's like a lot of defensibility in terms of, okay, wait, I think I was right, but you're not looking at it from the right lens. So here's where I think most of the folks from the bands that you just mentioned, as non-learners and probably those defensible learners would fall into. And for me, it sounds more like, do you think if you start helping people observe the fact that they're actually being defensible or they're actually trying to safeguard themselves from the learning, if you help them come past that, do you think these are folks who can actually cross the bands and sort of become, let's say, learners, or just become those semi-intuitives with a little more practice? Like, have you done that with folks by just observing them, or like, are there examples in the past that has that happened that way?
Yeah, this question actually connects back to the personality stuff we talked about a second ago productively, because one of the things that people will resist about personality is they feel like, oh, if you are this, then you can't do anything else. Now, that's not how your personality and your brain works. Your brain kind of has a more comfortable way of doing things. So if you're a super organized person, it is much more comfortable for your brain to be in an organized environment. That's not saying that the brain will explode if it is in a disorganized environment, but what the brain will start to do is work harder. So same thing applies to learning styles, that yes, your most comfortable style, whether if you're a resistant learner, if you're an eager learner, if you're a semi-intuitive, that's kind of your default most comfortable style. So semi-intuitives are very comfortable. They're actually more comfortable remaining curious about what's next than they are turning that curiosity off. It takes them more energy to stop being curious than to be curious. If you take the resistant learner, it takes them more energy to get curious than to stop being curious, because in their minds, they kind of have what they need, and let's use it. Let's work. Let's kind of continue using the tool we already know because it's good enough. And they will use phrases like good enough a lot to kind of defend the status quo level of the tool. So yes, you can get them there, but recognize instead of the person sitting still at that point, they're on a brisk walk all day long, right? They're using more
Mm,
calories, they're using more energy. The brain, the reason you feel tired
mm,
when you use something that's more outside your personality. So the reason introverts feel physically tired when they go to a party is because your brain is consuming calories, blood sugar, just like you would if you were
yeah.
exercising. Unfortunately, your brain doesn't burn, body fat, which would be great. Like introverts would be the skinniest people ever if they went to a lot of parties. But the but your brain is consuming blood sugar. That's the energy source
Mm,
for your brain. So when your brain's working harder, you get tired faster. When introverts
mm,
are being social at parties, they get tired. When people that are really organized or in messy environments, they get tired. Exactly
mm,
the same way that the introverts get tired. When people that don't like creative, abstract philosophical thinking are put into meetings where they had to tax their prefrontal cortex with those types of thoughts for an hour or two, they get tired, they get cranky, they get defensive. And same for the reverse, when people who are very philosophical are forced to think in super pragmatic terms and turn that off.
mm.
So that's kind of the idea. So the answer to your question is absolutely people can move, but they have to, almost like an athlete, build up their endurance
Yeah.
for that higher energy consumption that they're going to use.
Mm,
And
yeah.
and moving up the learning chain um, has a payoff. So if you are a neutral learner and you can get yourself to that semi-intuitive state, let's just say 10 weeks out of the year, 20% of the year, you could just have 10 weeks that you kind of read books, think more, and you space them out. Um, you'll use extra energy, but the benefits
Mm,
of using that extra energy are that, again, that your life goes from here to here. And
yeah.
it's that simple.
Mm,
A
mm,
little unfair in a sense.
mm,
Some people are born with more curiosity than others. And people may take issue with that. It's useless to take issue with it. It's more useful. Even if I'm slightly inaccurate, it's more useful to believe that statement than to not believe it. And because if you believe it, you'll actually do something useful. You'll take
mm.
action. If you don't believe it, then you'll just kind of
Correct.
keep with the status quo, and all the benefits are in the actions.
Yeah. No, I think the problem here is to first recognize that there are personalities and first start believing in that even before you understand, where you belong to or in terms of like trying to have, I mean, yeah, it is unfair in the sense that you are born with certain traits and certain interests. And as you, I guess, like grow through, like, with all your upbringing, with what you come up with at workplace, a lot of these things combinatively work together. So for me, like what's now fascinating here is the fact that that kind of a preparedness, once you're ready to put in, then there's a lot of time and resilience that it can take. But I think it pays off because you will start consciously moving your needle towards where you want to belong. It's like, okay, so I think I'm like naturally good at coming up with new ideas, being very creative. Then I'm not going to stop my curiosity muscle. I'm just going to get better at that, but probably I might have to expend my energy into something else because this comes to me very, very naturally. And vice versa, like you said, like use more, energy and use more of your, sugar levels in terms of trying to get to that curious level. And that's like taking so much time. So the fascinating part is, yeah, like this gives the power and puts back the person at the front seat and giving them the most tools for them to work together with and sort of like understand what you want to do about your career. Or it's not just career also, it's like what do you want to do about your own self, like trying to understand your own self and see, what ticks you and what drives you forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is kind of part and parcel with something that I say that seems to be not that interesting to people. I don't know why I'm so interested in it, but other people aren't, which is I really do believe that we now firmly live in an era where ideas have greater value than execution. And what you're talking about was learning and kind of increasing your capacity to generate a great idea uh, has a much higher payoffs than most people realize. Because when we built Satellite, we worked a long time with an external development company called HashRocket,
Mhm.
incredibly high end Ruby on Rails development firm. The execution was paid for, and the
Mm,
ideas flowed into that execution tool, not tool, but that group of people who were awesome at execution. Now, we were not HashRocket's only client. So that same execution had other ideas flowing into it, right? Some of those projects went on to be very successful products. Some of those
Mm.
projects didn't go anywhere. Just were middle of the road. So the execution in that case, and we worked with several different developers within HashRocket. All of them were outstanding, same developers that everybody else worked with.
Mm.
But our ideas at that period of time were much better than any of the other ideas flowing into that development organization. And therefore, our product was much more successful than any of the other products that were being developed at that time. So execution, we get so stuck on the concept of quality execution. I think people fail to realize that execution breaks down really quickly when ideas suck, or when they're vapid of details and vapid of substance and
Mm.
let's call it answerability. So if we said, if you go to look at the difference between Square and like Bank of America's mobile payment systems. At Square,
Mm.
the concept of we want to build a mobile payment system, you could sit down with the person who says that's the strategy and ask them hundreds of questions, and they will give you great answers to all of those questions. And if you sit down with the head of Bank of America's group that was building their mobile payment solution, you could ask them like those same hundreds of questions, and the person proposing the strategy couldn't answer any of them. They don't know anything
Mm.
about there's no substance to the idea. So people would amateurishly label those as the same idea. No, that would be like saying it's
Mm.
the same, uh, you know, it's the same golf club or the same car or the same soccer ball, because they kind of like look the same. They both have four
Yeah.
wheels. They both have a horn. They both have windows. So they're both cars. They're both, no, one
Trying to
is a
compare wrong
Ferrari
things.
and right. Yeah. So ideas, the headline of an idea is not the idea. Ideas have an amount of substance, an amount of detail, an amount of intellectualism that sits within them. And therefore, great ideas are actually extremely rare, because these are not the same idea, even though the headline is the same. This one is a much better idea than this one. And then when you move to execution under Bank of America has to make up for the vapidness baked into the idea, the fact that all these missing details in the idea itself have to be figured out in execution. Whereas over here in Square, during execution, it's really clear, like, well, these are all the things we got to do. These are all the APIs we need to generate. This is all the legal stuff we got. Like, it's really clear how to execute that idea. So again, execution is a commodity. Now, like earlier, some of the people down in execution are not a commodity, and they're awesome. But HashRocket kind of demonstrates what I am trying to say, that they're definitely not a commodity offering. They're elite offering. However, multiple clients could have them at the same time. So it does kind of suggest at least a certain amount that what I'm saying here has some legs, that if multiple clients can work with the same developers we worked with, have the same execution we had, then all of a sudden we need to look upstream at what ideas flowing into that execution to realize,
Right.
oh, wow, some of those ideas are much better than others. So I
Mm.
think that's kind of the thing. Becoming a great learner helps you generate less vapid, more complete, more calibrated, more brilliant ideas. And you should start to treat the execution. It's still very important. You have to make the thing, obviously, but you want the making part to be much easier, not much harder.
Yeah. Yeah. And the mistake is like in the side of thinking ideas and execution as mutually exclusive, because sometimes we overemphasize on execution and like try to say, okay, you have these ideas, but unless you execute and like put your head down, work towards it, this is not going to go anywhere. And vice versa, it's more like if you don't have great ideas and you don't think of something just radically, out of the box, then there's nothing, no amount of execution could help you. But I think like as you rightly mentioned, when we talk about ideas, we just like think about, okay, this is one liner. It's probably, doing X, Y, Z. But I guess to me, getting to an idea is trying to envision and like build one part on top of each other, like try to just build a whole journey in front of you, in the sense that, do you know if these are the problems that you want to solve, then the execution just becomes more of a, just take these pieces, arrange them into a jigsaw, and that's like going to just come one step after another. But when you don't know where the pieces are, but you just like probably say, I think the pieces are just in different treasure hunt places, then I guess like that's not the great idea. It's just like you're trying to envision something, but it's not yet like sitting down there as an idea. So and like this, I guess
Yeah, and that's
connects a
that
lot.
planning. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, that really is that planning we talked about. If you plan from the future backwards, and that's not just um fantasy is a picture of the future in your mind. So if we kind of add some vocabulary here,
Hmm.
vision isn't a picture of the future. Vision is what you get when you've finished connecting the future back to the present. That's vision. Fantasy is the image of the future, like, flying cars. Okay, that's a fantasy. Now, how do we turn the fantasy into a vision? We work backwards and we say, okay, what are all the things that have to be real in order for the flying car to
Hmm.
be real? And then you start to categorize. Well, there's aerospace engineering challenges, there's computer challenges, there's legal challenges, there's manufacturing challenges. We may need to build parts that are made out of things that don't exist yet. And
Hmm.
you start to realize this, and all of a sudden your fantasy starts to kind of transform into something like, wait, this is possible. And vision is possible. Fantasy, we don't know if it's possible or not. And we start to work backwards and backwards and backwards and
Hmm.
backwards. And we say, okay, if this material needs to exist in order for us to build the, rotor that gets this thing airborne, then we have to work backwards and say, well, then we need a lab in order to figure out how to make that material, which means we need these polymers, which means we this research and these people and so and so. And all of a sudden it clicks for you like, this is what we do next. And
Hmm.
then that's going to build into this and that's going to build into this. And I think that's where, again, if you don't have good definitions and concepts for these things,
Hmm.
then a lot of people, you can have great vision, and people will be like, dude,
Yeah.
you're in a fantasy world. No, you're not. Like that's why this idea and this idea of the Square and Bank of America example are so dissimilar,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
one was a vision and one was a fantasy.
Hmm.
And then when you move into execution, executing on a fantasy requires a development of all of that stuff. And usually it's all out of order. All the dependencies and sequencing, all the dominoes are in the wrong place. Like, let's go make this
Hmm.
rotor. And they're like, well, we don't have the commercially available substance to make this. And they say, well, just use what you can today. Well, boom, failure point, right? You
Yeah.
you didn't do it right. You created
Yeah.
a mistake in
Yeah.
it,
No
and from
anticipation
that
at
point
all.
on, you're doomed. Exactly right.
Yeah.
So yeah, you got to
Yeah.
plan from the future backwards with your career, with your projects, with product. If you want to be a founder, you need that vision, not fantasy. And you can probably you get your pre-seed round with a fantasy, and then use that money to turn it into a vision. But
Yeah.
that's kind of the first thing you got to do, is to say, can I envision a future state, what the world looks like with this product or
Mhm.
this service in it? And then how do we get from today to there?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that's what
Yeah.
makes
I think it's
things
a
simple, or
great,
just your career. Yeah.
yeah. No, I think it's a great one liner to just say, like, how much are you able to convert your fantasy into vision? And, like that's where all ideas, execution, thinking, learning mindsets, personalities all converge together, and how much you're able to convert that kind of a fantasy into vision. And at each stage, how much you're able to accomplish, not just for yourself,
Yeah.
but like have all these team dynamics into picture, like do it all, piece by piece, but with different people, different learning mindsets put together.
Yeah. I mean, vision and like complete novels have a lot in common, right? That, um, or at least a manuscript of a novel, right, has a lot in
Yeah.
common. And I think that's what people underestimate, is they kind of feel like, oh, Malcolm Gladwell or Robert Frost or Salman Rushdie sit down, and then the words just start flowing from page one to
Flowing
page
through.
398, right? And that is absolutely not how it works. It is just not how it works. And it's such a convenient way of not putting in the energy to
And
think
pulling
that way.
yourself.
But instead, yeah, but instead, it's just so much better to realize, getting the fantasy, having that fantasy pop in your head, it's a cool moment. It is really hard work to write the manuscript, to create the characters, to get the plot line, to sequence the chapters, to keep track of the objects that you've put in the environment and what they're going to do in the storyline later, to edit and clean things up. That's what creation of vision looks like.
Yeah.
And when people have great vision, they are super underestimated. Like there are people working in Adobe right now where I was who have incredible vision. And they're like, oh, you've got an idea and you've got an idea. So how do we know which one's better? Well, the one with incredible substance is the one that's better than the one that's just kind of this shell fantasy. And so many people can't tell the difference between the two, whether it's Google, Adobe, Microsoft, whatever you want to pick. And because you can't tell the difference between the high credibility and depth and completeness of a vision and the low credibility and vapidness of a fantasy, then the organization struggles to do anything later, and it looks like an execution problem. It is not an execution problem.
Yeah.
So
I mean, often it circles back to definitely strategy problems, and what could have been set right at the mid is what we missed, and we are like looking at it more at a fully blown stage and trying to say, oh, we've been long all through, and
well, and the strategy, it doesn't have to all be figured out on the front end because there's still a lot you're going to learn in real time. But the massively competent human who embodies the vision, who can answer questions along the way and untangle knots along the way, that is still not a part of execution. That is still kind of it's not just how much clarity do we make on the front end, it's how much clarity do we have the ability to make throughout the project. And great professionals are sources of clarity, some of which happens at the beginning, some of which happens throughout. And if you add an amazing execution team in, a lot of that clarity can be figured out autonomously too. So like my developers are incredibly great professionals, mindset and skill set. And there are a lot of times that we've talked over Slack in the past. We're like, how do you want me to do this? And they're like, never mind, I'll figure it out. And like their solution is incredible. And so they know they could get help from me if we wanted to work the problem together. So I could be a source of clarity, but in the execution side, they're also a source of clarity, therefore a source of vision, therefore the whole thing, the line between vision, strategy, execution is totally blurred in our operation, which is ideal. And that's because, when we talk about swim lanes as a company, and when we talk about it with our clients, we say you can have swim lanes, but instead of having those little plastic things that separate the swim lanes on the surface of the water, just paint or put tile on the bottom of the pool to denote the swim lanes. So the swimmers can actually swim back and forth between lanes on the top. They're not physically restrained from crossing a boundary, but they do know where the lines are. So like, yes, this is my job as the email marketer, like we talked about earlier, but I'm going to swim over to search. I'm going to swim over to social. And I'm going to swim over to CX because and then I'm going to come back because I know where it is, and I'm going to come back smarter. Whereas some people swim over to CX and they're like, what is a email swimmer doing in the CX lane, right? Why are you here? Totally the wrong response.
And it shows a side of bad delegation and also like not helping somebody look at the broader picture. And that's exactly what we would need when you are looking at, like, just bringing back our old point, which is trying to put your customer at the center focus. And that happens only when the entire team is just able to breeze into each other's parts and like try to tie around and get a singular approach to it, and not like look at it a more silent approach to it. So and a lot of this is built on trust as well.
Exactly right. You can put your customer at the center of focus. You can put your boss at the center of focus, or you can put the finance team at the center of focus. And if you don't choose the customer, you can go a pretty long time thinking that your boss or your finance team is the center of focus. But eventually, usually via natural selection, the customer will remind you who is actually at the center of focus. So I honestly, I struggle to understand how people can lose sight of this. I really do. I understand that there's lots of pressure and lots of optics to manage and lots of bureaucracy and stuff like that. But it really is silly that we drift away from realizing that the whole system of cause and effect in our business is about the customer and about the team.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
we generate great inputs to the customer and market, then the outcomes are highly probable at minimum. They're not guaranteed. We can certainly hold a gun to somebody's head and get a sale, or we can do all the right things and have a great product and probably still get the sale without them calling the police on us. And then the same thing with the team. We can set teams up culturally and operationally for success and then watch the success happen, or we can not believe that that will work. And then we can set them up with a bunch of rules and penalties and incentives and structure and things like that to force things to work and then watch it not. And it's just bizarre that there's really no evidence to suggest that not being customer centric works. There's no evidence to suggest that the autocratic and mercurial management approach works. There's substantial evidence to support that a high agency, high intelligence, collaborative, empowerment-oriented culture works, and there's high evidence to suggest that customer centricity works. So it's not that hard. And we just, I think it's a trust fall for people. For somebody that would want to tell you, if you were working for me, I wanted to tell you, generate this outcome, and if you do, this happens, and if you don't, that happens. For some people, that's more comfortable than to say, this is where we're trying to go. I trust you to come up with great thinking and collaborate with your peers and teams to get there. Either way, that's what you're doing. I'm just acknowledging it in scenario 2, whereas I'm pretending that I have more control than I really do in scenario 1. So
Totally.
humans have some work to do.
Definitely. And that's like so much more encouraging, right, when you do that. And wow, like very nicely summarized. And thank you so much. I think this whole session today has been very, very thought-provoking in the sense that we just discussed what's really happening, what literally 90 out of 100, I would even say 99 teams across the world. And these are very little micro, macro problems that we often stumble upon, but a lot of this is driven into psychology and the way we not only play with ourselves, but sort of have that interplay with our teammates around. So thank you so much for throwing light on a lot of these intricate details and so much of practical examples that we discussed. And I hope the listeners are able to, take those stories, try and understand what your personality exactly is like, start to understand or recognize that there is a personality, and then like get going with a lot more of these approaches. So yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, I think, as a summary, I kind of think about it this way. Biology should not be in your way when you're operating. So you just have to put enough energy into the biology to make that true. That's it. If you put zero energy into the biological side of your business, how humans feel, who they are, how they connect, how they think, you will have a biological problem that gets in the way of operations. And if you get rid of that, enjoy it. Go focus on operations until you need to maintain the biological piece again. So that's just kind of it. Like organizations, like you said, 99 out of 100 have some form of a biological issue in the way of their operational excellence. Fix it. Just make it go away so that you can get the operational excellence. It's that simple. It doesn't have to be your main focus. It just has to be enough of a focus that you don't have this big monster, this big friction monster standing in your way.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for
thanks very much.
With us.